Hi friends, my name is Borrodante. Let's create a brush in Photoshop. So some of the friends were asking to make a tutorial on how to create brushes in Photoshop. So let's do that. In this video, I'm not gonna be covering like everything, all the aspects, like all the tiny things you can do in brush engine of Photoshop. Instead, we'll just go through my approach of creating my kind of brushes step by step. Alright? Alright. So this is the main document where we're gonna be testing the brushes that we create. And step 1 is to create another document. So let's do that. It should be a square document, not bigger than like, I don't know, okay, 700 by 700 pixels. So this kind of small thing. And in here we paint a painting, a black and white painting, of what the brush pattern is gonna look like. So let's say we want to create like some kind of universal brush to use it everywhere. So it would be working out in any situation. So it should have some kind of benefits in its shape, yet it should be kind of natural. Something in the middle between a triangle and a square brush. Don't make it too sharp though. I'll explain it later, but it's not a very good idea to do that, especially if your machine is not too fast. So it's a good idea to paint a brush pattern with a soft brush of any sort. Now, somewhere we'll randomize the opacity of it, which will create a pretty fun effect. Something like this, I like it. Let's give it a try. So the next thing we do is, I guess we probably stretch the thing to fit the image. And the next step is we go into Edit and define brush preset. Create a name or really don't. At this step we don't need to think about the name because this is not the final brush we're gonna use. This is just the alpha for it. So we go back into the main document. As you can see, we already have this pattern applied to our brush. I didn't do anything, it's already here. And it works horribly. Good. So we open up the brush editor, this little window. Don't mind that. Actually, in brush presets, in the right click window, you'll see this sampled brush one. This is the pattern that we just created. It's available here. But let's make a decent brush out of this pattern. Okay, in the bottom section of these special modes, keep smoothing and build up on. So at the top, let's go to the brush tip shape. And in here we should make sure that the step is decent for this kind of brush. Right now we can see this ladder created by the steps, so we make the steps smaller. Maybe 4% will be good for this. Yep, looks good. It's best to go with as big of a step as possible. The smaller the step, the bigger the lag of your machine. Okay, we can see a tiny step, but remember, if you are going to use the brush mostly for small details, it's less critical, because when you make the brush smaller in size, even with the same percent of the step, you see no steps in here. It's gonna be cool. So if we're going with a kind of a small brush, like this is a good size to set up a brush. 250, maybe even 150. So let's try like 7 maybe? 8? Nope. Bad. 6. Kind of visible a little bit, but we're gonna apply some texture on top, so it's probably not gonna be visible. If it will be, we'll decrease the percent of the step. So for now, let's go with 6%. So while we set things up, here's the brush with everything turned off. It doesn't rotate, it doesn't change the transparency or size. So let's turn on the shape dynamics and apply pen pressure to the size. Now we'll have the change of the size. Now this seems cool, but actually in practice, if you're creating a painting, changing size is the last thing you need. Kind of. Well, you might use a little bit with like 70% minimum, and you can see it slightly changes the size of the pattern. Good enough. Next, angle. In angle, we need to apply pen tilt. Now, your tablet might not support that, which is cool. In that case, you probably want to go with a different type of pattern, meaning Not this kind of shape, but something close to a square or a circle, something that doesn't really require any rotation, doesn't have like a direction. So right now we turned on the rotation and you can see that I can rotate the pattern. Now, I can't demonstrate you, but it's actually a bit off from the angle of the pen. Right now I'm pointing the pen completely vertically, like this. And the shape of the pattern is a bit off to the left. So we go to the brush tip shape and we rotate this thing here, slightly like this. And you just search for a good angle so it would face the right direction. Yeah, kind of like this is good. So now we have a brush that slightly changes the size and rotates with our pen. Cool. Okay, roundness, don't touch that. That's really not necessary most of the time. I actually want to decrease the effect of size a bit. Let's go with 80%. Don't really like when it changes the size too much. Now, next thing we need is transfer. This is the second basic thing you need. This thing controls all kinds of transparency for the brush. So I turned it on, and right now it doesn't do anything because everything's turned off inside. So let's start with opacity. Turn it on for pressure. And now we have this effect. Opacity is a kind of transparency effect that applies this layering effect of transparency. You see, when I'm pressing very slightly, it remains at the same transparency level. But if I press harder, it becomes more and more opaque. So this is a very nicely controllable type of transparency. It's really cool. I used to not like it. How stupid was I? But for the last couple of years, I really appreciate this kind of transparency. It's very comfortable for creating shapes, for searching something. When you can slightly press on the pen and search for the shape a little bit, then you increase and define something more defined when you are more certain in the shape you're looking for. So it's a really cool thing. But not necessary to stop on that one. Let's add another type of transparency, which is flow. Let's also apply pen pressure to it. Pressure is the way to go. Nothing else really works that well for transparency. So for now I'm gonna turn off opacity to show you the pure effect of flow. So this is what flow looks like. It actually makes each copy of the pattern slightly transparent, and as they overlay one on another, they immediately add on the opacity of each other. So this is less of a controllable type of transparency, but it's really important for creating kind of like a bristly effect of the brush. Because as you can see, we have these kind of holes in the pattern. And that's why I made them. This is what I was going to explain later. When we're creating a stroke with this kind of brush, we see kind of like lines inside of the stroke. And if we do a solid, like strong stroke, we won't see any lines. It's gonna be solid. So you have the ability to go between a solid stroke and a stroke that reveals some bristly effect. And this is actually very helpful for painting because bristly strokes, they kind of like define the dynamics of the shape better. Kind of like adding some hatching in painting. So this is a really cool thing. But it's hard to control it because it's really highly dependent on the spacing. If I'll make the spacing like 1%, I will barely be able to control the transparency. Like I'm pressing super slightly right now. And it's completely opaque. So it's hard to control, so try to avoid using 1%. That's what I usually do with my brushes, but that's because I'm very special. But the point is, they're hard to control, and then you really have to only rely on opacity and also some transparency effect in texture options. But now let's apply both types of transparency at the same time, and you can see how it's altogether transparent, like easily controllable with the opacity, and it reveals some bristle effect with the flow. So it's a cool idea to use both of them. It gives you more freedom as you make a stroke. Now, moving on to the most fun part, which is texture. turning that on. And in shear, it's really important to find a good texture on the internet. Let's do that. So let's search for some dirty, dusty photo texture, maybe something like that, and preferably so it would be seamless. So let's use those keywords. And let's check out what we have here. Something nice, something with not just obvious stones or kind of ugly, crumbly patterns in it, because this is really important. This is what is going to add this special style to each stroke you make, so be very thorough. This is interesting. It kind of looks like a canvas pattern, like some kind of fabric. So let's try this. I usually avoid using any kind of textures like a pure canvas when you can see that it's a flat surface. I like using texture to add chaotic details to the thing and plus add some realism to it. And when it's a flat texture, it kind of kills the three-dimensional effect a little bit. But again, nothing wrong with using the actual canvas pattern that will create like the fabric effect on it, because that's literally the way traditional artists work, so you might want to simulate that, but I'm not gonna do that. Let's see, I thought this one, yeah, let's try this one, it's interesting, some scratches. Try to find a texture with a good amount of details in colors, like not super black and white, but something that goes more or less softly and subtly from dark gray to bright gray, so it would give you some space in defining the contrast of the texture later on. So we save both textures on the desktop, and let's start with this one. This seems like a lot likely to be seamless. Anyway, we open up the thing and we again go to edit, but we press not define brush preset, but define pattern. That's where textures go. So we press that, we click OK, and we go back to our document where we test the brush. Open up settings, everything is still the same. Let's go to the texture thing. So we turn it on. Everything might be in a very weird setting, the way I have it. This is the one, right? Let's just believe it's the thing. Tileable, eroded, blah blah blah, yeah, that's it. So we turn it on, and the most impressive, I guess, setting for using the texture is height, but it's quite a tough one to set up properly. This is where it's really important to have a nice shades of gray kind of texture, so it would have a bunch of different ups and downs evenly spread everywhere, so it would be comfy for you to use. Now, we select the height, we remove the texture each tip checkbox, and we start lowering the depth until the very middle of this test stroke becomes transparent. So it should still be opaque, but everything else should be as transparent as possible. This way we make sure that the texture reveals itself as much as possible, but still if we press to the maximum, we will be able to create a completely solid stroke. Now let's test this setting. I didn't touch anything else, let's actually move it to the way it usually goes. 0 and 25 here, and 100% scale. So this is the kind of thing we have here. Cool. Now, what's the difference between checked and non-checked texture each tip checkbox? When it's checked, it's gonna be only applying itself to the transparency of flow. And that's why we can see a slight effect of the texture where these bristly transparency moments reveal themselves. But the actual transparency of overall that I'm pressing not too strongly, and it's still kind of like all very transparent, that doesn't really get this texture on it. Now, if we remove the checkbox, now it's gonna apply the texture to the whole thing, including the transparency of opacity mode. And this is like a lot more effective and cool looking. Some brushes only work with opacity, so it's a good thing to remember this, that you need to remove the checkbox from texture each tip to actually see the effect. Cool. Now, if we're gonna be using texture each tip thing, we might want to use the pressure control on it. And in this case, we can lower the depth to 0 when we apply a small pressure. This is like a secondary control over transparency of the flow with the texture. Like texture is eating away each copy of the pattern stronger, improving the effect of the flow. So now we're gonna have this effect quite more revealed thanks to this setting here. And without it, it will still be this very subtle effect. So with the pressure control, it's quite usable. But it looks very different because it reveals the bristly things a lot stronger. And it doesn't affect the opacity settings. You see the difference? This is with the checkbox on. In this case, texture is affecting only the transparency of flow, revealing a bit more of bristles, but it doesn't affect the opacity. And in here, opacity is involved very strongly in the texture as well. That's why we get a lot stronger contrast that goes beyond the limits of the opacity at this moment. Like I was pressing very slightly, yet some places are really dark. That's because texture is distorting those values. And in here, they couldn't go higher than that opacity value. I feel like that's super hard to understand in words, but I hope the visual aid helps. It's really a thing to experiment with a lot. Just play with it to find a good effect of your brush. Experiment with the shapes of the pattern and everything. It's kind of fun. If you're a nerd. So yeah, I'm gonna keep the texture each tip on. And I'll use the minimum depth effect, because I like that the texture is revealed very well, and it also improves the effect of the bristles, and at the same time I can easily control the overall transparency of the stroke with the opacity. If I press stronger, I'll still get a lot of texture effect, but I can still use these layers of transparency. This is like a very thorough control of the stroke. Awesome. So this is the kind of brush we get here. This is for creating like solid basic brushes to actually like start and finish the painting with, usually the way I go with some of my favorite brushes. I actually kind of like this. I think I'm gonna save it and use it in my collection. It's really important to create a brush with not perfect shape. Some artists like to use like perfect triangle, or not exactly perfect, but it's like totally a triangle, or a square. They're good to develop shapes with, but it's a problem because sometimes you want to just paint some particles or tiny highlights, and you'll just go tapping very rarely and quickly somewhere, and you will see that you get like super obvious triangles or squares, and it's not cool. It only works well with circles because circle is kind of a thing. It kind of works like the depth of field effect or something. But in case when you just want to create natural shapes, it's a good idea to go with more of a natural, unperfect shape. And don't forget to change the angle when you're applying that thing, so it looks not that obvious and not that nasty for the eye. Like this, I didn't do much work and it doesn't look that bad. And if it would be like a perfect triangle, it would be horrible. And there we go, we can get away with a pretty quick approach on painting. Kinda cool. I'm gonna save this brush in here. What do we call it? It looks like a potato. Let's call it a potato brush. Wait, all the names in my collection have Japanese names. How do you say potato in Japanese? Okay, how do you pronounce that? Potato. Okay. Can we just use this? Awesome. Potato. I think it will be pretty cool to use. So there's that. We create this kind of pattern. We save it to brush presets. We set it up the way I just told you. These are the main aspects of creating a good brush to work with every day. Not too heavy, not too complex, with nice, realistic, yet comfortable to use settings. Kinda cool. You can download the potato brush on my Patreon's page, link is here and in the description, for free. So yeah, this is it, I guess. Hope everything was clear. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments section. I'll be answering those in text mode. But for now, I thank you for watching if you did. I guess you did if you're here. Leave a like and subscribe, tell a friend. Eat potatoes. Do whatever you want. And I will see you in the next one. Bye! Potato. Os.